Hi guys, my name is Yolanda Burgess and my husband Andrew and I live in Zimbabwe, Africa. We are missionaries and we work with women and children. So I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions that you guys sent in, and they are some great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and read off the name and then the question, and go ahead and do my best to answer that. And so if I don't pronounce your name correctly, I am so sorry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and try to read it as best I can. So please forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. So let's get started. So the first question comes from Audrey. And Audrey asked, are there things that are socially acceptable, yeah, in Zimbabwe, that aren't in the US? So yes, there definitely are. And in fact, there are lots of things that you can or do in the US that you can't do in Zimbabwe. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of those. So the first thing that comes to mind, that if you read any information online about coming to visit Zimbabwe, you'll find this is at the top of the list, like don't pack this. And that is camouflage clothing. Any clothing that is camo, you are not allowed to wear in Zimbabwe. In fact, you're not only not allowed to, it's not just not socially acceptable, but it's actually illegal. So you're not allowed to wear any clothing, whether that be a cap, shirt, pants, dress, anything like that. If it has camouflage, you're not allowed to wear that. And obviously, that's not the case in the US. Another thing is respect for elders. So in the US, if you believe somebody is doing something that's wrong, or if you feel what they're saying is not accurate, for example, if your teacher is making a statement or saying something that you know is not truthful, you will most likely call them out on that and say, well, that's not accurate. That's not true. You're saying the sky is green, but the sky is in fact blue, right? That's a silly example. But just as an example, you would never do that. Well, you should or you could do that. Whereas, in Zimbabwe, you never question your elders, ever. Like, you never show them disrespect or dishonor, even if you know that they are wrong. Even if you know they're doing something morally wrong, you would never call them out on that. It is highly disrespectful and socially not acceptable at all. Another thing is the people here in Zimbabwe are really reserved as far as emotional expression. For example, men do not show any emotion in the sense of tears. Like, you will never see a man crying in public. Whereas in the US, that is completely socially acceptable for both men and women to show those types of emotions. Another thing would be Zimbos care a lot about they're very status conscious, right? So when you meet a Zimbabwean, they most likely are going to talk about their education level, their occupation, their skill sets, things that will elevate them within this society. Whereas in the US, you generally do not start a conversation with those things because that would be considered very prideful, right? In the US, it wouldn't matter what sort of status a person holds, right? At least that's the overall general goal of the society, and that is not true in Zimbabwe. In fact, the status is so important that even the poorest of people, if they have any means whatsoever, they are going to try to send their child, their graduated high schooler, to university, even though Zimbabwe has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. We have like a 94% unemployment rate in the world. And even though a person can go for a 4-year university degree and not be able to find a job, a person will still go because being able to say you've been to university is so important. All right, another thing that is totally not socially acceptable is to talk about politics. It is not socially acceptable to speak about politics in Zimbabwe. And there are some safety concerns regarding that also. Whereas in Zimbabwe, in the US, you will see people discuss that very openly, very passionately on social media, and that is actually not acceptable in Zimbabwe. And then last thing, again, like I said, there are many things. Last thing would be breastfeeding. It is completely socially acceptable to breastfeed uncovered. In Zimbabwe, it's very common to see a mother with a baby on her lap, and the baby may be, say, 2 years old already and will stop feeding, and the mother will not cover herself up. She will stay exposed for a certain amount of time in case her child wants to continue feeding. And of course, in the US, that would never be socially acceptable. So those are just a couple of things. All right, next question. All right, I have a question from Tatum. Tatum asks, how different are the school systems and what's different from here and there? Okay, so there's a lot of differences. So the first is you start school, and when you start school, that would be considered like kindergarten in the US. We would call that ECDA, and you would start that at either the age of 4 or 5, depending on if your birthday is in the later part of the year or the early part of the year. And then we have ECDB, which is like preschool. And then we have 1st through 7th grade. And 1st through 7th grade is what we call junior school in Zimbabwe. And in the US, that would be like elementary plus middle school together. And when you finished 7th grade, you go to high school, and that you would start Form 1. And high school would be Form 1 to Form 4. And usually you're about 16 or 17 years old. You can write your O-levels, and you can graduate high school at that point in time. If you have the means, in other words, the financial means to continue schooling, and you have the grades, you would then go on to do 2 more years of high school called A-levels, and that would be Form 5 and Form 6. And in order to go to university in anywhere in Africa, you are required to have A-levels. You cannot only have O-levels. So you can't have 4 years of high school. You need to have had 6 and graduated with good grades. And A-levels, those 2 years, are almost like the equivalent of 1 year of college, but in the US, but they would still only be considered high school. A couple other differences would be sports are compulsory, mandatory in Zimbabwe. You have to do sports. It's part of your education. School starts at about 7 a.m. and continues until 1 p.m. and then we stop for the day. It doesn't go until 3 like in the US. So at 1 you stop, you generally have lunch, and then you have homeroom where you're able to do homework, and then for the rest of the afternoon until 5 p.m. you have sports, and we have all types of sports, soccer, netball, which is almost like a girls version of basketball. We have rugby, which is similar to football in the US, and then we have hockey, not ice hockey. This is called a field hockey. Swimming, which is generally only available at private schools because water is scarce. And but then we have things like art and computers and technology. Things like that don't actually exist in a lot of public schools, which we call government schools in this country, because those schools don't have the means to provide those things. So those things are usually only available in private schools. And then all schools, private or public, you have school uniform. Boys and girls, they have a school uniform, they have a sports uniform. It is required. You cannot show up in regular clothes when you go to school. And so those are just some of the differences of schools in the US and Zimbabwe. All right, next, some other questions we have. The next question is from Bryce, and Bryce asked, what kind of currency do you use in Zimbabwe? Do you use other forms of payment like credit cards? So yes, we have lots of different forms of payment here in Zimbabwe. The first would be the Zimbabwean dollar. That's cash, and that's the Zimbabwean currency. And I actually have some money here to show you. So this is Zimbabwean money. We have a $2 and a $5, which really isn't in circulation right now because this is very, very little. Remember I told you that we have the highest unemployment rate. We also have the highest inflation rate. That means the Zimbabwean currency is not worth much at all right? So this is like, I don't know, like 20,000, you need 20,000 Zimbabwean dollars for like $1 US, I believe. So this is just some of the currency that we have in the country. This is money that is no longer in circulation. This was stopped being in circulation in about 2008, 2009, but I wanted to show it to you because this is a $50 million note. And this is not even the largest note we had. We had a $1 trillion note, and that was after they removed 12 zeros off of the currency, all right? So remember, highest inflation rate, which means our money doesn't have a lot of worth. But in addition to using local currency, we are also able to use the US dollar. And you will see US dollar prices in most stores, and it is the currency that's most acceptable. But there is an exchange rate between the local currency and the US dollar. Another form of currency is EcoCash, and that's mobile money. It's money that you transfer from a bank account onto your phone, and you use your phone to make payments and transactions at different places. It was actually a type of payment that was used for people living in rural areas, people who live in mud huts, and people who work in the cities. They were able to send money home because, of course, those places don't have banks. But they started this form of currency called EcoCash so that people in rural areas were able to get some money from people working in urban areas. All right, yes, you can use credit cards and debit cards. Credit cards are not something that's common in this country. International credit cards, you can use an international Visa card, but you do have local bank debit cards that you can use also. All right, the next question is from, let's see, Melody. So Melody asked, what languages are spoken in Zimbabwe, and are they hard to learn? All right, so anytime you learn a new language, it is difficult to learn a new language. But the language in Zimbabwe, I'm going to tell you first what they are. English is a national language, which means most people are able to communicate in English. Shona is the national language. It's the main language that's spoken by majority of Zimbabweans. And there are about 11 different dialects of Shona. And then the third language that's a national language is Ndebele. And of course you all know English. And then Shona and Ndebele use the English alphabet. They have the same letters, and I'll give you an example of that. This is the only Shona item I have in my house, but this is a Bible, and this, I'll read it for you. It says Baiberi Zene. So I'm recording this on my phone, so the words may be backwards, but I just want to show you this is just the English alphabet. It's not like Arabic or Mandarin or other languages that have different characters. And Shona is a phonetical language, which means that you can sound it out. So most people are capable of reading it, even if they don't understand it, because the way that you sound it out is the way that you say the word. Ndebele, on the other hand, is not. It's a little harder. Ndebele has the letter L and X. Shona does not have the letter L and X. And Ndebele can sometimes have like a clicking sound. So like they might say Ngoza, which is actually a language in South Africa. And Ndebele actually comes from the South African language, the country of South Africa, the Zulu language. And so a minority group of people speak Ndebele. All right, next question is from Haley. And Haley asked, what is popular clothing in Zimbabwe? So you might be thinking that people walk around with grass skirts, or they have these big headdresses, right? Or they might have things like leopard skins and things like that, but that's actually not the norm in the country. Most people dress in Western attire, in something that you would see in the US. Obviously, name brands don't matter, but most people would dress in a very similar fashion. There are a couple differences. For example, in the US, I've already told you how you wouldn't see a mother breastfeeding necessarily in public and very openly, whereas in Zimbabwe, breasts are not considered attractive, but knees are. So women generally attempt to have their knees covered. The younger generation is getting away from that more and more, probably because we're getting clothes from overseas, from Western countries, so things like shorts and shorter skirts are things that are available. But generally speaking, you will find a woman over the age of 40 who will always have her knees covered because knees are considered very attractive. But there are a couple things. You have things like Ankara, Ankara, and it just is a type of African fabric. It's very brightly covered fabric. This is Ankara fabric, and this is a skirt. And Ankara is very colorful and usually has tribal motifs on it. You know, circles, triangles, squares, mosques, those types of things. And usually they are multicolored. This one's only blue and cream, but usually they have lots of different colors, contrasting colors like blue and green, or pink and red, or pink and orange together. Those are sort of colors that they would wear together. So this type of fabric would be turned into dresses and skirts and shirts for women. Very bold, very bulky attire, long dresses, long skirts, and this is very common for a lot of women to wear. Something that's very common, whether middle class or poorer community, in the traditional attire would be a headdress, which is, they call it a duku, and it's just almost like a piece of fabric that looks like a triangle, and they wrap it around their heads. And so that's very common for a lot of women to wear. Another thing would be a wrap. They call it a Zambian, and it's just a rectangular piece of cloth that they would over their dress or pants, they would tie it around their waist, and they generally use this to sit on. So if you see women gathering, sitting under a tree or on the ground or on a bus or anywhere, they will take the Zambian off and they will sit on that. And it's called a Zambian because a lot of those pieces of fabric come from the country that borders Zimbabwe that's called Zambia. All right, we need to get going, yeah. I'm taking a little bit too long on these questions. All right, next question is from Amy, and Amy asks, how hot does it get in Zimbabwe? How do you keep cool during really hot days? So fans, we always have a fan on. We have our windows open at all time. We try to stay indoors or in the shade outside if you're at all able to do that. I mean, we have little fans like this that we use that we will literally take with us in the car so that when we are running errands, we have something to cool off with. We have things like this cooling cloth. So you see that I'm completely wet right now. This is not sweat. It's from my cooling cloth. And so it looks really strange and weird, but this is a special kind of fabric from the US that we put in really cold water, and you put it around your neck or your wrists in order to cool yourself down. And you'll see Andrew and I are usually have one of these around us to just try to keep our core temperature down. Right now at 4:45, it was like 88 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's still hot even later on in the day. The temperatures can get as high as 100, 110, but generally the temperatures are between high 80s and high 90s in Zimbabwe for most of the year. During the winter months, which is generally in June, July, August, or May, June, July, and August, you will have your temperatures go as low as 40 degrees. And that's when the sun goes down, and before the sun comes up, it can get as cold as 40 degrees Fahrenheit. But during the daytime, even in winter months, it's still at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, next question. I think the next question is from Toby, and Toby asks, what kind of animals live in your area of Africa? Lots, lots and lots and lots of different types of animals. So I have a couple photos here of just some photos that I've taken myself of animals. This obviously will not be in our backyard or when we're just driving around in town. This is generally going to be in more rural areas, on game reserves, protected areas, because poaching is a major issue in the country. But of course we have over here, we have rhinos, and rhinos are an endangered species, and so we have both the white rhino and the black rhino. We have giraffes, all right, those are beautiful, the tallest animal in the world. We also have elephants, the largest land mammal in the world, all right, we have elephants, and then we have zebras. Something really cool about a zebra that you may not know is that zebra stripes are so unique that each and every zebra has a different stripe pattern. So zebra stripes are as unique as each individual fingerprint is for humans. So that's just really cool. Again, we have lots of other animals. We have hippos, which is considered the most dangerous animal in Africa. More people are killed by hippos than they are from lions or leopards or cheetahs, all of which we have. We do not have tigers. A lot of people think we have tigers. There are no tigers in Africa. We have a lot of different types of antelope, which are all similar to the deer family. We have kudus and impalas and elands and sable. We have hyenas and jackals and wild dogs, and let me see. Oh, we have water buffalo, not to be confused with the bison. We have wildebeest and warthogs, mongoose, lots and lots and lots of different types of animals, in Zimbabwe. But again, you don't generally see them in town or in neighborhoods. They are in more rural settings. Okay, next question is from Isla. And Isla said, what foods are popular or common in Zimbabwe? What are your favorite local foods? So the staple diet in Zimbabwe is called sadza. It is made out of white corn that is ground up into like a type of meal, almost like polenta, but a little bit finer, and you boil it in water, and that is the staple diet. Most Zimbabweans will have that every single day, most likely multiple times a day. It's usually eaten with nyama. Nyama just means meat, so a type of stew. And then with muriwo, which means like vegetable greens, kind of like kale or collard greens that you cook up with tomatoes and onions. So that's sort of like your staple meal that most people will have. But there are other things that people eat, that you would not find in the US, things like oxtail, so that's a cow's tail, chicken feet, very common, chicken necks, fish eyes, cow intestines, pig ankles, sheep brains. I mean, these are all common things. Mapani worms, flying ants. These are common things and common forms of protein that would be consumed here in Zimbabwe that you most likely have never tried before. My favorite food would be biltong, which is just meat that is dried. It's very similar to jerky, but it's not cured, it's just dried meat, literally dried. And I love that. And then I love rooibos, which is a type of tea. It's red tea. and it's only grown in southern Africa, and so that's one of my favorites. And of course, my fruits is probably the thing I miss the most when I'm not in Zimbabwe. Things like mangoes, avocados that get the size of my head, lychees, you might pronounce it as lychee in the US, guavas, prickly pears. Those are just some of the things that I absolutely love. All right, the next question comes from Claire. Claire said, what is your favorite thing about living in Zimbabwe, and what are some challenges? So, before I move on, I was going to show you, this is a very common treat in Zimbabwe. It's called maputi, and it's very similar to popcorn, except there's no oil involved, and it's cooked over a like a metal pressurized tank that you over the fire that they keep turning, and then when the pressure gets too much, this pops out, and then they just sweep it off the ground. Usually they have it in a room, and then they salt it, and this is called maputi, and this is like a very common snack. All right, so Claire was saying, what is your favorite thing about living in Zimbabwe? So the people and the food, and the lifestyle. It's a much slower paced lifestyle. People are very community oriented. Family time and breaks like holidays are really important for people to have, and I really appreciate that. Next question is from Carice. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Carice and Briel. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that accurately. And they ask, what made you think of the idea to start a workshop for women, and how many people do you work with? So we work with 17 women. We have 2 different groups of women that we meet with on a weekly basis. And we have hundreds of children we work with. Our children's program, we host 3 times a year, and we have about 120 kids, different kids every time that attend that. We also have larger groups of women that we work with on one-time basis for special events, also like a sewing seminar, and we might have 80 women available. But on a consistent weekly basis, we have about 17 women that we work with. And the reason for this is that poverty is a major issue in the country. A lot of people are poor. About 42% of the population are considered poor. We have over 1 million orphans in the country due to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so we have the highest inflation rate, so a very poor economy. And so those are just some of the reasons why we work in Zimbabwe. All right, the next question is from True. And True asked, what do you do for fun or in your free time? So this is going to be surprising, but we probably do things that you would probably do yourself. We enjoy watching Netflix and we enjoy reading a book and enjoy going for a walk, and just very similar things that you would do in the US. But some things you wouldn't do is we get to visit some great places. We get to go out to some safari areas where we get to see these wild animals, the photos I showed you. We get to go to Victoria Falls, which is one of the 7 natural wonders in the world, and it's beautiful. It's one of the largest waterfalls in the world, and so it's just really fun to be able to go to places and visit places like that that are only found here in Zimbabwe. And second to last question is from Zayla. Zayla asked, a lot of people think Africa or Zimbabwe is very poor and not very clean. Is this accurate, or how is it actually? So Zimbabwe is poor, and Africa as a continent is one of the poorest continents in the world. So that is accurate, but that doesn't mean that there aren't wealthy people. There are a lot of really wealthy people in the country also, but they are the minority. In fact, one of the richest people that live in Zimbabwe, they have a penthouse in New York City. And they are multi-millionaires. And so millionaires do exist in the country, and we do have skyscrapers in the capital city. People do live in brick homes, and people do have running water and electricity, but not everybody does. There are a lot of people who don't have access to clean drinking water, people who don't have access to electricity, people who do live in mud huts. As far as cleanliness, Zimbabwe is not a dirty country, but the poverty does influence whether or not a location or an area is clean and hygienic, or not clean and not hygienic. And that is purely due to resources, not being able to have the funds, not having access to water to be able to clean, and not having access to trash pickup and other such things. All right, and the last question is from Gracie. And Gracie asked, what kind of things do you do for celebrations? So the two largest celebrations in the country would be Christmas and Easter. We have some public holidays also, but they are not hugely celebrated as a country as a whole. So the two largest ones I would say are Easter and Christmas. Easter is considered a religious holiday. All schools have off on both the Friday as well as the Monday, because the Monday is considered Easter Monday. Work would have off, like not just schools, but even the whole country shuts down for the Friday and the Monday. And usually that starts the school holidays for that month. Something I didn't mention during school is that school is year-round in Zimbabwe. School starts in January and ends in December, and they have 3 one-month holidays or vacation. So you have a month in April, a month in August, and a month or 6 weeks in December. And as opposed to school starting in August in the US and going until May and having a 3-month summer vacation. That's not the way things are here in Zimbabwe. All right. So that's Easter, Christmas. It's usually Christmas Day. That's the big deal. Everybody usually goes to church on Christmas Day, even if it's not on a Sunday. It can be a Tuesday or a Wednesday. People gather together with families. People have Christmas trees. Maybe the poorer people obviously don't. Homes are not very decorated like they are in the US. Nobody puts lights on their houses, and nobody has like decorations on their lawns and things like that. And towns don't generally decorate. Some stores will decorate with some tinsel or things like that, but for the most part it's not as decorated as you would find in the US. There is one extra holiday which is called Boxing Day, and it's on December 26th, the day after Christmas, and that's also a public holiday, and it's a day that most people go out for picnics, and or they have a braai. A braai is what you would call a barbecue, cook meat over the open fire, and that would happen on the 26th. All right, so that's all your questions. I hope that you guys, I hope I answered everything. I hope that was helpful to you. And thank you so much for giving me the time to share a little bit about my country, Zimbabwe, Africa. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.